What a blessing it's been getting to know better people that I know around town. But today we begin a new journey because it's not always easy to step up to somebody that you don't know, but you kind of admire and you want to learn more about. But the vulnerability steps in within yourself and we hesitate, and then the moment passes us by, and then it becomes easier and easier to forget to introduce ourselves or to try to connect with others in our community. And so for the next few days, we're going to try to connect, and you can feel the vulnerability in this on the screen as I connect with people that I haven't really met or haven't really talked to before, but I've wanted to. I've seen them in some aspect of life, and I've wanted to learn more about them. And this week, we're going to step out and we're going to try to just show you the beautiful things that can happen when you step out and meet people, even if you're feeling a bit awkward like I do right now. And I'm sure that my guests throughout the week may feel a little bit of that as well. So today we picked someone very special. It's someone that I saw at a distance at the opening of a park within our community. And she was just so beautiful in the way she interacted with her child and with her family and with others around. I wanted to know who she was. And when I asked, her name is Sha'Kiya Morris. And let's welcome Sha'Kiya to the We Are City of Five Nations podcast. Hi, Sha'Kiya.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. And so on that day, a few months ago, I stepped up and I said, hello, I'd like to meet you. And you told me about a podcast at that point that you did. And you said that you were trying to get some things started within our community. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your heart within the City of Five Nations?
Absolutely. I am a transplant. We just moved here in 2018, the summer of 2018, and I have always wanted to bring about a sense of community awareness and togetherness. And one way that I decided to do this was to design websites and create a podcast that really helped get my voice out there and other businesses who aren't here locally, but they are here nationally, who are really helping to develop a message about sustainable awareness and how we can help build a regenerative future. And this started when I was back in seventh grade, and I created this organization, and it was basically going around and helping community members who were in need, and it helped the most vulnerable in our society, which is the homeless and elderly people, and those who are just under that threshold of the poverty line. I take and bring those experiences, and I wanted to bring those here. And so far, I've been able to collaborate with companies like Regenerative or Regen Friends. I'm sorry. Like here in Shawnee, I've been able to work with the Lions Club and Gateway to Prevention, and it's really helped provide some type of insight as to what the community really needs. And Shawnee is strong. Uh, it is a community filled with beautiful faces, so many cultures. And I have noticed that everyone wants to bring about a sense of togetherness and show the strength that Shawnee has. And I just really wanted to be a part of that. So I just jumped out and reached out to whoever I could. And really, that's how you and I met, was when I was working with the Lions Club. I just kept collaborating with them. And one day it just erupted into this park opening, the same park that I was planning to clean up, having no idea that was their initiative. And that's how I kind of got in connection with them. And that led to the park opening. And that's how you and I met. But this has been a lifelong thing in the making for me. I've always worn my heart on my sleeve. And I've always wanted to make and build a strong community. And for a long time, I felt like my voice didn't matter. And the podcast was a way for me to express my voice and start to share my vulnerability in sharing my voice. So yeah, that's how I ended up
Yeah.
here, and that's basically in short how I have developed from um, the powers of her. And I also help kids in the community who are helping, who need help with job placement and with the intern collective, and we can speak more about that later.
Sure. And through that day at the Lions Club Park, that in itself, a collaboration between the Lions Club, the YMCA, the City of Shawnee, a lot of different organizations and a lot of different people coming together. And isn't it interesting how the spirit moves within people and you identify? Because I remember that day you mentioned podcast, and we had thrown around podcasts before, and the ideas, and just couldn't really put our hands on how to grip it and
Mhm.
to make it happen. And even with meeting you and the loving spirit that you exude, it was a part in leading to this podcast, which is another offshoot of things in which you impact. And talk about that a little bit, Sha'Kiya, in the sense of so often people feel powerless or like their voice is not heard. And really, we do not realize who's listening.
That's right.
And sometimes that's the most powerful aspect of just staying in the game.
That's right. So this past year, actually, I have had a chance to. I reached out to people. Some of them I was like very afraid to approach because of those titles, because of their education background. But once I put all of those barriers away and just approached it as a human first, I began to see and I began to notice more of this trend of being consistent. When you are consistent, I see that you are able to take charge of anything. No one will be able to hold you back if you can hold yourself accountable. And that's what I began doing. I began not only holding myself accountable, but I began reaching out to others who are also holding like companies accountable for their actions in the environment. Companies like Gopher, who has really changed the game of utility and energy waste, has really changed the game in that whole realm. He had an idea one day, and if he wasn't consistent, we would not today have the accessibility of taking charge of our energy waste. And this is just one example. There's another example is Regen Friends, who has they go and speak to these companies directly by changing their bottom line and the way that they go about their sustainable efforts in the environment. Now, I would have never known about these people if I didn't put myself out there. I would have never known about you. I wouldn't have if you don't put yourself out there, it's almost like you're being left in the dark. Each person can help provide some type of light on our path. And they can also, some people can take it away. And and it's up to us to be stronger and become more vulnerable in that state, because when we let our guards down, that other person will as well. And that is basically what has led me into this whole reinvention of myself. I was homeless for quite some time in my life, and I didn't want to reach out to anybody because I thought people are going to look at me differently. People are going to think of me differently. They're going to think that I don't know what I am doing. And it was, we all must come to some point in life and realize, when we realize that, hey, you have to stand up. You have people around you. Reach out to them. And they don't have to be people that you even know. But that vulnerability had allowed me to take the step to change, make that change that was necessary in order for me to have the life that I have now. And I can use that experience to help others who may possibly be going through the same thing, at risk for the same homelessness type of homelessness that I was in. Um, but it being vulnerable is key. And I share this every chance that I can on LinkedIn, on Instagram, as any social media platform gives you that opportunity to become vulnerable. And how we use our voice really can move mountains. It really can. And I think that
Well,
what you're doing is a prime example of that.
well, I was privileged to meet your husband and to meet your child. And you're talking about hardship. And
Mhm.
I know in my life, that's when the greatest time of growth has come for me, is through hardship. And then also the greatest time of reward, in the sense of on the other side of that hardship. And it seems that through those galvanizing experiences, when something just on the inside of you, they just kind of comes together finally and goes cha-chink, it then becomes a chain link in who we are as we continue our experiences down the road. And you had mentioned, and what I have noticed is the success that Sha'Kiya Morris has had. The powers of her website was the first place that I went after we met, and you told me a little bit about it. And I thought, she's a very smart lady. I don't quite get what she's talking about. And so as we pull up your website, I would like for you to share a little bit about the bio ideas and how you're trying to make life better for generations to come.
Absolutely. So the powers of her is a creative umbrella that I've created that encompasses everything that we could do to encourage green and biophilic communities. And that involves every type of fundamental value that is part of the United Nations um, Sustainable Development Goals of 2030.
Okay.
And this is to create about a social awareness. I want to really hit hard on the indigenous communities and raising awareness for how we can bring back their traditional cultures and
Mhm.
traditional values and incorporate that into our modern societies. Because if you native cultures have an understanding about the world that I think that others can learn from, other cultures, other modern society.
Mhm.
So
Agreed.
the powers of her is just to bring about community awareness and community building through collaborations and strategic solutions. And what that means
Okay.
is I can go into a business meeting and provide creative solutions to their most difficult problems. Um, Basically, thinking outside the circle, because in a business it does involve a circle of people in order to be successful, and not it's not a box at that point. Um,
Yeah.
we I think it's just a different way to approach the traditional community building formats.
Okay. And so I notice, can you see your website as we scroll through it? Can you see it on your screen?
I do see it, yes.
Okay. So earth friendly community building, I believe, is what you were describing. But I also had noticed, if we can scroll and I can see the top again. Um, I also noticed, let's go over to the blog. And on the blog, you had a couple of stories that acquainted me with kind of your thought process. And the first one there was the zero waste 10 or zero waste X. And that made me begin to realize that you were all about taking care of those things that we discard, that everything has probably another potential use. And then I saw the mommy in you, Sha'Kiya, because you were talking about the cardboard playhouse and kids being able to have fun. And as I perused, then as we go back to the website, as I perused a little bit back to that home page, and on the bottom of the home page, it says something like, next page, let's go, I'm sorry, let's bring to the original page. It said something like, a better future for those who are coming after us. And it's down here, and it's almost like your tagline right by your head. It is encouraging future generations to become more than they could ever imagine. And that's where I connected with you, Sha'Kiya. Right there is the encouragement aspect of human beings, first of all, but then the encouragement aspect of those who generally um, don't realize the power in which they walk, and they just need to be encouraged that they can accomplish anything as long as they put into place what you talked about, being consistent.
Mhm.
I would like to know, as a mother, how important is it to you that your child feel that your child feel the empowerment of being able to accomplish whatever they were designed to accomplish?
So my son's actually, I have an 11-year-old and a 2-year-old. And
Okay.
my son is actually, he's been doing online schooling, and it's allowed me to see ways that he's struggled, and basically learn to hone in on those and encourage him more on the dynamics of education. Um, I really want them to express and show the world their gifts and what they're amazing at, and what makes them amazing humans. So one way that I do this is I take them out in nature. I show them that we can rebuild and remake things out of items that we already have. We don't need to have an excess of items, because in this world we are producing so many more materials than we are actually needing to use. So I want to encourage them to become part of their environment instead of being in their environment.
Oh, wow.
And that's the type of environment, or that's the type of message that I really want to share with children. I wrote a children's book, The Adventures of Ben and Rugby, and this is accepting change, even though you can't see change. It's there. And when it happens, we have to learn how to accept it. And I think children are the most vulnerable in not understanding how to accept change. And that's the overall message, um,
Okay.
is to understand change. Because to become part of your environment, you have to understand the change, just like the leaves on a tree.
Yeah.
So that is the way that I live my life, and the type of mantra that I want to share with others. But that's what my children, that's every single day. I teach them of our consequences and how to become um, whole in in our environment, and understand that our decisions are directly related to those to that interaction.
It is so interesting as we do watch the change throughout nature and throughout the seasons as the leaves come and they go. And right now we're in that change from, it seems like everything brown, which has a beauty within itself. But then there is just something in that early sunrise, on the early sunlight, when it hits the green now and it just pops like, wow, I've never seen this before. But it is just so wonderful how there's that example of change all around us. And many years ago, we began saying, together we build community, one season at a time, because each season does really bring something new. And as we talked about those chains, or the links in a chain that create who we are, as we're children, we're putting more of those chains together. And then as we transition into adulthood, a lot of who we are is pretty strong on the inside of us. And we then are resistant, perhaps, to something being different around us. As you work with children, and then you also work with adults through this process of bioregeneration, or forgive me if I don't know the terms properly, but that you get it.
Mhm.
How is it different, and how is your message different with the adults that you work with?
The adults, it's it is almost having an awakening. Um, it's a realization that our consequence or our decisions have created such consequences that our children are going to have to deal with. And I basically approach it as such. Um, Sometimes we need to understand the severity of our own decisions in order to understand which way we should, which way we should decide to go. And that's when one way that you can do that is making that other person vulnerable. We're circling right back. If you are in a business meeting and you need to get a proper, something as serious as this around, an approach needs to be vulnerability. Show them that you can be vulnerable. They will then express their vulnerability. You can come to some type of a ground. But I express the same type of a message to adults that I do children. And it's again with consistency, but it's also with collaboration, because the adults need to be able to understand and collaborate successfully with children and with younger generations, because those are the ones who we are making decisions for today. And if we don't acknowledge that, real change won't be made.
So what I'm hearing you say is something that's very difficult to do in many cases, in the sense of, because the way of our makeup and the environment has formed us in our decision-making processes and how we view different things, we feel like in many cases, well, this is the way you need to do it if you want it to change or you want it to be successful. And we have a hard time realizing that just because it works for us doesn't mean that it works for someone else. So in the vulnerability definition of what you're describing, does that come into play in the sense of, perhaps I'm not right, but I'd like to share this, or I perhaps may not fully understand where you're coming from because I have a very clear picture of how it should work out?
Right. So I would present it with multiple options. That way you can see what the mindset of the individual is. If you can see by three different questions or three different types of scenarios, you can figure out what type of person this individual is. Then you would change your approach. I would change my approach. I would change my demeanor, and my voice would even change, because some people, alphas, require stern, blunt direction. You have the betas who are kind of shy and like, okay, I'll take it with a fine grain of salt. I'm interested. And then you have the, I guess, the outsider who really is the creative thinker of the group. They've been basically like a wallflower, if you will. They've been able to see both perspectives, and that's mainly the type of direction that you'd want to go, because they're obviously on that person's team for a reason. I would start creating some type of a dialogue that would describe the three different ways, and it would be maybe a kind way, a green way. One would be more strategic and analytical, and then another one would be human based, and that would be, how are you going to interact with the or with this person, product, or some type of interaction, engagement. And then I would go about it that way, versus it's this way or no way at all.
Okay. All right. So I want to play a game. I'm a game player. And we talked earlier in the week in order to get ready to just set a date and be able to come onto this podcast. You had not heard really about what we did, and then you said, okay, let me look at what you do. So then I sent you a link and you said, okay, I'm already there. And you looked. So now I want you to give me an example of your way of approaching somebody with questions that might be tough to ask, because I'm sure there were things that you found were like, they could do this better, or why aren't they doing that? Or what about this? Okay, so let's play that game. I'm that guy you're trying to figure out, but you're trying to help. And let's just go through this real quick, just for a few minutes.
Okay, so
it's now your podcast. Here you go.
Okay, so Well, I would need a problem to approach. So I
But
I
I was
really didn't
hoping,
see I really didn't see the problem.
Sha'Kiya.
Huh?
Oh, okay. I was hoping you saw a problem,
I
that
really didn't
needed
see a
fixing.
problem with anything of, any of your content at all. So in your case, I would go. So the more stern way would be this. So you need to basically increase your appearance, your interactions on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and Pinterest even. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, why Pinterest?" Pinterest is a quick 2-second thing that somebody can allow, like somebody can look at your information and instantly want to go to your community building series. So
Okay.
that would be, I would recommend that you do that today, and that you will see an increase of maybe 1,500 people a day on your of traffic on your website, on your Instagram,
Mhm.
on anything that you choose to use most of your time on. And I would suggest going into a schedule, sign somebody up who's good at social media management. There you go. Um,
Okay.
that would be a more like a more direct approach.
Straightforward.
That's
Yeah.
that's like, okay, you need to do this today, and if not, you're losing out on a whole nother audience that you could have
Okay.
audience to. Um,
Fair.
so a more, I guess you would say passive, a more beta version would be to recommend that in order to create some type of an image across all platforms, I think that you should do more involvement on Instagram. And these are the reasons why. Instagram can create an instant connection between you and your audience. You can then collect all of your audience members into a whole group, and then those people are now friends. We can create new communication techniques and greater engagement for your company and for your series. And then the
Very
most
good.
creative one would be if you have access to web design and graphic design, even gaming. You do series on gaming, and you can do series on. I'm just giving different like suggestions now.
Wallflower.
Different series on gaming, on how you collect different people from the community to speak to. We're just trying to think of ways to get people more engaged with your series, right? So let's just
Yeah.
go about different ways that we can create it. So we can do podcasts, we can do marketing. Let's do some advertisements.
Yeah.
It's
That's
just
right.
things like that can almost, you're basically going for the same thing in every single one. You're going to increase your audience, you're going to go through some type of social media engagement, but it involves the same thing every time. So it just depends on who I'm speaking to, and you first get that type of demeanor and that tone over the phone. You want to set up a meeting with somebody, speak to them on the phone first, because you have more of a chance of understanding that personality type through their
Mhm.
voice. Like
Well,
you are very friendly, but I can tell you're an alpha.
that's just because of my high forehead.
You like to
That's
take charge of things, and you also have a kind heart, and both of those things create a strong leader. So I think that is why your approach and what you're doing is such a great thing for communities, both locally and nationally, and whoever else can hear this, so globally.
well,
So that
thank you very much.
that would be it
I
right there.
Well, I think my whole approach is the more beautiful of a person that you can get onto your podcast, the more people are going to be interested. And every day I've been so amazed at the beauty that shines through each and every individual. And I've learned something new, even from people who I know pretty well, just by having a conversation like this, because whether we want to admit it or not, just to come on a platform like this in which you are on a window to the world, you feel a little bit vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, I think it's proving your point that we all have a deeper honesty, perhaps, than what we want to walk around the office with, or we want to walk through the day. I recall walking through life with a very stern look on my face. And it wasn't really because I was stern, because I think you're right. I've been created with a kind heart, but it was more of a protectionism. And I didn't even know that I was putting that off. And so when we can come together, even on a digital platform like this, and Sha'Kiya, you and I can get to know each other a little bit better, we do grow closer, I believe, as a community. And I think that that is really at the core of what I would say back to you is, in defense of how we do what we do, is that, what? The connections are where the beauty really becomes sunrises within each of our souls. And that is really what we're looking for, is to make everyone feel that way in different and new connections that we all can make. Because in a community, we spend 85% of our time within 10 miles of our own home. So why can't we have sunrises all throughout the day rather than at just 6:52 a.m. when most of us miss it anyway?
That's right. That was beautiful. That's beautiful. The power of we.
That's right. And I want to emphasize, because I've gotten confused a little bit, and I've Googled the power of her, and I was like, wait, I know I was there. You have to put the S on that. It's the powers of her. And so make sure that you put the S when you go and you search for Sha'Kiya Morris. And Sha'Kiya, thank you very much for taking some time from your day. I know that we snuck it in between your 2-year-old's nap, and we appreciate it. We know how tough it can be to be a mom.
Thank you. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity and the chance. You guys can head over to Instagram also at The Powers of Her. I'm on there daily.
We love it. Thank you very much, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, Daniel. Bye.
We'll see you again soon. Sha'Kiya Morris, the powers of her, just somebody that I ran into at the park one day, and I admired the look, I admired the energy in which she and her family were walking, and it's been a pleasure to get to know her a little bit more today. And I hope that these next few days really help you to feel a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more secure in your vulnerability, to step out and introduce yourself perhaps to people that you've thought you'd like to meet, but you just haven't been able to do that. And tomorrow we'll have another example with that. Senator James Lankford, we invited onto the show, and he has graciously accepted. And tomorrow at 10 a.m., we'll spend about 15-20 minutes with James. James, of course, we know spends most of his time now in Washington, but he's very much plugged in here as our state senator for the state of Oklahoma. And I did meet him once at a local restaurant in the city of Five Nations many, many years ago. And I'm anxious to see if he remembers that. We won't know until he comes on tomorrow, but we hope that you join us as we talk to Senator James Lankford tomorrow at 10 a.m. on the We Are the City of Five Nations podcast. And we're in the middle of our 30 days of community days, 30 days of community building series. And here in the City of Five Nations, we always want to remember that together we are building community one season at a time. Again, thank you all for joining in, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.